Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order and begin with the roll call. I'll begin with myself, Caleb Davis, Chairman.
David Hall.
Scott Fuller.
Bill Bennett.
Rob Whitwood.
Wade Purdom.
John Krieger.
Claire Marley for the county.
Al Isaac.
All right. Looks like we do have a quorum, and the first action item on the agenda is the election of the chair.
Oh, Ron.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, Ron, I forgot you're digital tonight.
All right, you got it.
All right, we'll add Ron to the list there.
Ron
Thank you for
Sutton.
calling in.
All right.
So this is the first item, is the election of chair and co-chair. So I'm gonna open it up for nominations.
I'll nominate Caleb for chair and Wade for co-chair.
Okay, do I hear any other nominations? And I want to emphasize, if anybody else is interested in chair, please speak up and I will be more than willing to hand over the reins if you're interested.
You interested in chair, Ron?
No.
All right.
That's pretty bad.
So, yeah, Rob nominated myself for chair and Wade Purdom for co-chair.
And the second was,
Do I hear?
Nobody seconded it yet.
Well,
I'll
second it.
Okay, so John seconds that. Discussion? Any discussion? No? Okay, so all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, so that was unanimous. All right, thank you, everyone. Now let's go ahead and look at the minutes, and I'm hoping everyone had an opportunity to review them. Are there any changes to the minutes, or do we want to accept them as submitted?
Looks good to me.
I move we accept them as submitted. I did not notice any changes that need to be made.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay, Wade moves to accept them, Rob seconds that, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the minutes as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Say no.
I abstained.
oh,
Okay, so for the record, we have 2 abstentions. Yeah, you got them. And then, so let's go ahead and start the proceeding on application. I'm going to call the hearing open for file 24-0029, Comprehensive Plan Map Amendment and Zone Change. Sater LLC is requesting approval for comprehensive plan and zone change map amendments from suburban to rural community commercial for a 1.77 acre portion of a 5.33 acre split zone parcel. The parcel is located at 67220 Highway 2 and is identified as Assessor's Parcel RP 62 North 02 East 172710A in Section 17, Township 62 North, Range 2 East BM. The rural community commercial zone requires a minimum site area of 1/4 acre to 2.5+ acres, depending on community water and sewer availability, and allows for a single-family duplex and multifamily housing, as well as a variety of light to high occupancy class uses. Has anyone had any ex parte contact or need to disclose a conflict of interest?
No.
Okay. Those being none, Claire, would you please explain the process for us?
sure, on the screen. The process, I think everybody I see here has been here before, but the process is, it's like a hearing. And it opens with a brief presentation by staff, followed by the applicant's presentation. The Planning and Zoning Commission can ask questions during that first phase of the process. When that's completed, then the chair opens it first to those who are in favor, those who are neutral to the project, and those who are opposed in that specific order. And then there's a rebuttal chance by the applicant at the end of that, should there be a need for that. After which they close the hearing and deliberate. Prior to closing, they can make sure that they've had all their questions answered from the applicant.
Thank you, Claire. Did you have a description that you wanted to share as well, or?
Sure, you want to go ahead and jump into that?
Yeah, let's jump
All right.
into that.
So apologize for our technology shortcomings. Planning and Zoning Commission gets the application and the staff report a week ahead of time. And so I'll ask that they refer to this as we go through the process. This particular property is located at 3 Mile Junction East about 6 miles. Its address is 67220 US 2. And as was summarized by the chair, they're seeking a zone change due to the fact that the property is split zoned, and they wish to go to all the property being rural, community, commercial. On our staff reports, and if anybody needs to see this any closer, I'll try to show that as we discuss. The blue strip that goes through the property is the current rural, community, commercial zoning, and the small bit of orange remaining on this parcel is the suburban zone. They want it to be all one so that they can develop their property consistently. So that's the basics of it. They have less than a third of the property that's in that orange, that's not the rural community. And over, our understanding of the map as this was developed, it was along the highway, it was a certain number of feet on either side, and didn't necessarily take into account the divisions of the property or the different parcels that were within that zone. And it may be also that in that time we didn't have the great interactive mapping that we do now. So in this instance, the applicant would like to make that change to his property. The staff report goes through a series of discussions about what each of these zones are and advises on minimum zoning allowances for this future zoning. And I think I'm gonna scoot over to the slides because it might help me a little bit to remember what all we're gonna talk about. But as you all know, that when we do a zone change, the comp plan is also needing to be changed because the county is zoned and comp planned everything the same. So in our instance here, we're gonna be looking at a proposed, sorry, let me just help you a little bit to get So the county commissioners are the final determiners of a zone change application. So the Planning and Zoning Commission tonight gives a recommendation, and this is a 5.33 acre parcel. At this point, we have had no public testimony that's been received in writing for this application. We did have a series of agency comments that went out, and we had a few responses back to them, which are also in your staff report. Those briefly noted from county addressing no issue, roads and bridge noted that it's under ITD because it fronts on Highway 2. We sent this, as I said, to about 12 agencies. DEQ had no comment, and Panhandle Health District said if there are any changes that need new sewer and water connections or new sewer and water septic or well, then they need to go through that permitting process. The rest of the presentation recited the process that you go through to determine whether or not a zone change should be approved. And those requirements are that you have to find that it's in accord with the comprehensive plan. Since the map is also being changed, you'll look at the policy statements of the comprehensive plan to make sure that this future proposed zone fits your comprehensive plan policies. And at the tail end of the report is a summary of what those policies are. And I think that pretty much summarizes what I needed for this moment.
Thank you, Claire, for doing that, and I totally understand the difficulties it creates not having the slideshow and making it more visual, but I think you did a fine job in verbally expressing the content of the staff report, so thank you for that. So, did anybody have any questions for staff before we go on to the applicant?
No.
All right, thank you, Claire. Mr. Slater, did you want to speak concerning your application, or did you want to have your representative, Mr. Staples, speak? Either one or both, or?
I don't have any comment at this time,
No comment?
no.
No, okay. Well, anybody on the board that would like to ask any questions to the applicant regarding this application? No questions? Okay. So, go ahead. So now, this is the opportunity for those that are in attendance from the public to participate. So the first round is gonna have those that would like to speak in favor of this application. This is your opportunity to speak if anyone wants to speak in favor. Nobody wants to speak in favor. Does anyone want to speak neutral? How about opposed? Anyone here would like to speak opposed? Okay. So we'll go ahead and close public testimony, and Typically, we have a lot more questions on more complicated applications at this stage, but we're just going through the procedure and the process. This is when we would allow you to provide a response to anything that was brought up, but it doesn't sound like anyone from the public had any areas of concern. But before we close the opportunity for you to say anything, I'm again opening it up for an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions for the applicant. Go ahead, yes.
Oh, I was just curious of what the density of use is as far as amount of traffic, you know, that kind of thing.
Traffic, like personal traffic off the
Yeah.
parcel onto the highway?
Yeah, because we don't know what, I mean, I understand, you know, the overall of it, but, you know, we don't know the future, what he's gonna use it for, so I was just curious.
That's true, we may not, there's a plurality of potential uses within the current zone and the proposed zone. But because there's such variety and it could shift from owner to owner, there's no, I don't know of a way to pin down exactly what that particular use could potentially be.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Unless Claire would like to address something that, regarding the nature of the zone.
Claire Marty for the record, we did make note on page 3 that there is a current use of a storage unit, and the applicant can share the size of that. We show it's less than 5,000 square feet. So if they wanted to do something that exceeds that, then they have to come back through you for a conditional permit. And then there are a number of other, as the chair said, a number of other uses that are permitted outright. When they go through a zone change, they don't have to tell us what they are, but we have to, as a group, determine that all those available uses are correct for that future zone, that they are fitting for that particular area and your policies.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Did you have any questions for the applicant before we go into deliberation?
No, I just understand if anything, you know, in the future for business or anything like that happens, we'll be looking at it again probably, so.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
That's right.
Ron, did you have a question? We heard something pop up on there.
No, we're good, we're good.
All right, thank you, Ron. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and close that part of it and open up deliberation amongst the board. Does anyone have any comments that you'd like to state before we go forward?
I'm not seeing any concerns, any problems with what's proposed.
The majority of that lot is already, I mean, the part that they're using, right?
Right.
And it's not spot zoning, because that strip runs all the way across the whole area, so I don't see any.
I think that the packet that we received provided a plethora of data as to the nature of the application and its implications. And considering the fact that the vast majority of the parcel is already zoned according to the request for the remainder, I'm not seeing anything that would be inconsistent with their comprehensive plan or the nature of that zone that's not already being utilized.
Not at all.
So it seems very consistent. So those are my comments.
I agree, I don't see anything.
It just makes sense.
Okay? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll do it. I move to recommend approval of the request to amend the Boundary County Comprehensive Plan, land use designation map, and the zoning map from suburban to rural community/commercial, file number 24-0029, finding that the proposal is in accord with the comprehensive plan and the criteria of section 18 of the Boundary County zoning and subdivision ordinance, based upon the findings and conclusions as written. This action does not result in a taking of private property.
So moved. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Wade has made the motion, Rob has seconded that. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda. open file 23-0180, land use code text amendment. Boundary County has initiated an amendment to its subdivision and zoning codes to repeal current section 4 enforcement of the Boundary County zoning and subdivision ordinance and adopt a new enforcement section establishing procedures, remedies, and penalties for addressing land use code violations. The proposed amendment would define violations and declare them to be a misdemeanor, set a process to review zoning complaints, seek compliance, and authorize various remedies to abate violations. All right, so now that we're on to this particular application, Claire, do you want to talk about the process again,
Sure.
or the nature of the application?
So everybody who was here for the first one heard the announcement about how the process works with respect to testimony. The only thing that's different about this is we'll go through the same process of presenting, and then the chair, once we come to the public testimony, you can testify in any order. It doesn't have to be those in favor and those against. So you'll just call out that it's time for public testimony. I do have 3 copies since we don't have a screen to show, so it looks like I have enough to go around in 3 groups of you in case you want to follow along or have any questions.
Thank you.
You got one? Okay. Anybody else? So here, as you recall, Claire Marley, excuse me, I forgot to say that for the record. As everyone recalls, we began this discussion about a year ago. We were able to meet with the county prosecutor, the sheriff, and the undersheriff. We discussed our situation with various complaints that have not been able to be resolved, and the status of our current code, which is chapter 4, which had some challenges that kept us from being able to administer some of the abilities to see files that were violations closed. And as a result, there is now in front of you a proposed replacement chapter 4. So the proposal is that the entire chapter 4 would be repealed and a new chapter 4 would be adopted, known as code enforcement. And I'm going to run through slides again so I don't forget to say what it was that we had for changes so that everybody can at least hear that. You won't see it. So first of all, I think we had shared with you that we have about 50 violations in various stages of hopefully being abated or working on those. That's from 2020 through this time frame today. And the outcome of our meeting in August of last year was that we were going to look at this amendment. We brought the suggested changes both to you and to the Board of Commissioners so that they were following along with what the proposed changes were. So you've had a chance over, I think, about 4 sessions to look at these changes and to give feedback to me and to our prosecutor as we went through that. The first and biggest change is that the proposal is that the infraction process would be taken away. There are questions about whether a county can issue an infraction versus a city which has a police force. And the new penalty would be, or would remain as the misdemeanor. There was some public concern about, well, that could be a lot. Most of the times when those punishments are there, the maximums are $1,000 or 6 months in jail, or they could be both. But rarely, I've done 30 years of planning work, and I have only one time seen one person go to jail, and it was for a gross violation of a landfill, sewage disposal, and junkyard that was acres in size, and the county failed to get any ability for them to clean it up, and so the judge said, it's time for you to clean it up, one time in 30 years. So typically, that misdemeanor is not imposed. The goal is that you work with an applicant or a landowner to try and get compliance, which would remain the goal of the county through this process. The other major change is the current law says each week is a new and separate violation. The change would be each day is a separate violation. It means you have the opportunity to say there's a new violation occurring every day. Again, that's rarely used. It's usually that single violation, and they attempt to get compliance based on that. One of the other troubling sections was that there was a way that you could pay a fine between $1,000 and $5,000 depending on your violation. And then you would be forgiven of that violation and the county can come back and correct that. So that's proposed to be removed. And then the other important part of the proposed code is that it would say that if you have a violation today and this new code is adopted, that violation can still be treated and addressed even though you have a new process for looking at violations. The other change is that the document you're under now lists all kinds of different violations, and if you miss one, you might miss a ability to look at a violation. So the newest one, you all helped, the P&Z helped to craft that language where it simply says any action or inaction that violates your land use law is considered a violation of the code. So it just simply simplifies that. And then, again, the second part of the code section, if an illegal structure, a structure was built without a permit or didn't meet setbacks or had other issues, they could pay a fine up to $5,000, and it says up to, and the violation could remain. And so that's also being removed. In its place is a series of remedies, and if you have your code in front of you, the remedies section is enumerated, and I am gonna go ahead and go through that since it would have been on the screen. So starting at page 2, where it says remedies, it begins with a list of opportunities that the county has, one of which is a stop work order. That can be used in an event where there's a health safety concern, where they could place a stop work order, or else to be able to stop it until that violation is cleared. And one thing with your discussion that we did add to that is that in the event you have a house under construction, it's like today, it's raining, we would allow them through an agreement to close that in or at least protect it so that they don't lose the structure while we're working on whatever their violation might be. That has to be worked with the prosecutor so that that allowance is there, and then specifically says that doing that doesn't waive our right to still declare that's a violation and work to get it cleaned up. The injunction opportunity was in your code. It's tightened up a little bit as to its wording. It just simply says that the county has the authority to seek from the courts a temporary or permanent injunction. And number 463 allows civil actions. And in this instance, through the discussion with the prosecutor, it's the Board of Commissioners who brings a action that's a civil action as the county's official head of the governing body. They're the ones who bring that. Civil actions are at 4.6.3 of our draft. 4.6.4 allows a recovery of the losses the county might spend on going to court or following through a process to bring about an abatement, and that again adds a little bit of teeth to allowing the county to take care of a violation, but also not to lose money at the same time in doing that. 465 is withheld permits, and it says that no permit may be issued or granted on other land use activities until the subject property is in conformity. 4.6.6, very, very simple statement. The prosecutor is authorized to enforce this ordinance. 4.6.7, notice to title. We've had quite a bit of discussion about this. A number of counties use this. And what it says is that if you fail to obtain an abatement, one of your other tools would be to file an injunction, or excuse me, not an injunction, a notice to their title that says there's this violation on the property, this land use violation. And what everybody's concerned about is that we'd always want to make sure that you're saying what is in fact the case and that you don't want to place a cloud on the title. So the ultimate decision on this one was that we would only have that opportunity to place it once court determines there is in fact a violation, so that it protects the county as well. As far as the process for the complaints, the Planning and Zoning Commission was interested in basically keeping our 2-letter process, which first starts out with a regular notice by mail. We often add that as an email too, simply because people communicate that way. But the first letter would be, we believe there's a violation, here's what we see or hear, and please respond to us and advise of your ability to abate this, or let us know if there's no violation. So it's that first letter that goes out. If they fail to respond in the timely manner set by the code, then the second letter is a certified letter. And it announces a penalty ability for the county to penalize if there's a failure to abate, and advises that if not abated, it goes to the prosecutor. So that's the second letter, which is pretty much the same as yours now, with the exception that your current one says they just had to respond, so they could say hello to me, or they could say thank you, or whatever, and that would be sufficient. But the process would be that they have to abate it, or they have to show us why it's not a violation. So slightly different language, but somewhat the same. As the objectives are to first allow them to respond and allow us to work with them, or the county to work with them to abate. Other changes, your code now says they may report directly to the sheriff, and the sheriff doesn't want that to happen. We need to gather the evidence first, we need to know there's a violation, and then it needs to go to the prosecutor. The exception that the sheriff makes is that if in the work of the planning department, we come across violations that are not land use violations, that are like child welfare issues, that we have to report those. We're aware of those in our work that we do, but he reminded us of that. The county does have the opportunity to seek immediate action if there's a threat to health, safety, or welfare. And that is supposed to be the two-step process I talked about. The remainder of my presentation, Chair, was to have up in front of you the code, which everybody, I believe, has a copy now, and then to go through a quick bit of information about who all was provided this information. We had probably about 20 to 25 taxing districts and media who were let know about this change. And then we also did the notice in the newspaper, and we received no written agency comments and no public comments, other than John Poland, who had actually provided that as we were working on it. I summarized that in the report, and his questions were about the concern about lack of infraction options for minor violations, meaning that the county could be less inclined to act on violations if it's the misdemeanor is the only choice. But we do have other things that we can, I'm saying this now, that there are other things we could look at and not necessarily just do a misdemeanor. And then John also says a clear statement that each day is a separate offense is needed. He agreed with the remedy section for action by the commissioners, a public official, or a private citizen. Notice to title should be considered a last resort, and I believe you had a copy of that letter in your packets. And then, as always, the requirement of the adoption of a text amendment is one that needs to be shown as meeting your policies of your comprehensive plan, which were listed at the very end of the report. And then, as always, your decisions are sent to the Board of County Commissioners as a recommendation. And that's the end of it, unless you have questions.
All right, thank you, Claire. Any questions for staff?
Kinda.
Kinda?
We're getting there.
Well, you can take a moment.
I'm sneaking
There's
up.
no rush.
I'm sneaking up.
Yeah.
What is the time between the first and the second letter if they don't respond to the first letter?
All right, need to look at that.
Is it on it?
Yes,
Oh.
14 days. So the first one, the 4.7.1 notice of
It's right on the bottom.
complaint. Then the second, the one that contains the certified letters, again, 14 days.
Okay.
So is that based on the date of delivery or date of post-mark?
We use what typically is not counted are the day it's sent out, and then the 14 days, we count forward 14 days from the day sent after the day.
And then 14 calendar days, not business days.
Unless it says otherwise, it's always calendar days.
All right, any other questions for staff?
Not at the moment. I reserve the right to ask questions.
You most certainly do.
I just got reserves.
No, I totally get that. I mean, we have been going through this process for months and months now, and we're kind of getting to the end phase of it, so I totally respect if you want to go through it and fine-tooth comb yet again as we get through the last steps of this process, so there's no pressure to be hasty and going forward, but yeah, if you've got questions, highlight things. And
I'll start with the
come back.
easy one first.
Okay,
I appreciate John Poland's letter.
yes, certainly.
So that's a question for him on wording on constitute versus constitutes.
Yeah, that needs to be fixed.
What number are you on?
4.5. And I was referencing John's letter. But I'm not the great,
Oh, okay.
I'm not the great, orator, so I don't.
Actually, that's, I was gonna bring that up later, but that does need to be.
Oh, it's
corrected.
typographical?
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
I think that's clear.
Yeah,
yeah,
I got you.
I don't think it's
Are
substantive.
we on that?
He caught it way back in October.
Yeah.
Good job.
Good job, John. All
I
right.
don't like the misdemeanor thing. I just think that's too harsh.
Well, it's, like she said, it's not the only option.
I know, but I don't know.
I think the reasoning behind that is that we do have some offenders that do just don't care.
Agreed.
And when we can't apply monetary pressure, finding them, or something along those lines, then it becomes more of a, what else do we have? Like, I'm thinking like some of the junkyard situations that we've seen over the years.
And I could also add to that, Claire Marley, for the record, that in my time of doing zoning abatement, and the times that we've gone to court, rarely have they said $1,000.
Sure.
It's more often gonna be 2 zeros instead of 3
That's why it
zeros.
says up to.
Yes,
Yeah.
up to, right, yes.
And on that note, the current language that we have in our ordinance, what does it state with regard to misdemeanors? Would you be able to
Oh,
pull
I
that
have it
up?
here, yes. I could pull it up, but you wouldn't be able to see it.
That's-
I do have the code section here, and are you asking about what the violation is?
In relation to misdemeanors.
Oh, okay, so that's state law. State law says it's $1,000 or 6 months in jail or both, up to is what it says. And are you asking me to
Well,
recite
I'm
He's
that?
asking if the current ordinance.
I think what Kate was asking is, are there any misdemeanors currently in the ordinance?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, so there's a precedent for that.
So I just wanted to highlight the fact that that's not necessarily something that we are creating and adding to the ordinance with this process, but it's already pre-existing. Does that make sense?
And also, we're not the ones that actually have the final say in it anyway. It goes to the prosecutor as a misdemeanor,
Correct,
right?
and eventually
they-
to the judge.
And they can do that entire plea process or have that conversation with the.
Yeah, so here's my, I'm not gonna word it very well. So say you're building something, you made a mistake, you're building yourself. You get a fine, you're like, oh, what do I do? You go to the lawyer's like, well, I'm booked out for 3 months. Are you still getting fined like $1,000 a day by not?
No,
No, that wouldn't be the process at all. If we do these now, but the process is the letter goes out and they typically rectify. We see a pretty good percentage of folks who come in. For that, there's no fine at all. We're just getting the permit processed and provided to them. In the instance where a fine might eventually come, it would be, they would be cited, we would go through the prosecutor and then on to court before there would be an imposition of a fine. Your earlier question about do we have misdemeanor, it's at current code 4.1.3, so it is there already.
Are we, so if they respond to the letter and they say any more time, is that something we
It
also?
happens all the time.
Right, exactly.
We-
So that's one of the things I think you're concerned with the most is
Right.
the amount of time.
I just like,
14
if
days
you,
is
if
a
you
long time.
really like have a bad problem, like, there's like 2 lawyers in town, what are you gonna do?
Pay
You
more
know?
money.
No, I mean, they're not
Yeah,
gonna
no, I
do
get you,
anything,
I
like,
get you,
you're out of
exactly,
line,
I get you. So I think the real thing is we just want communication back about
Right.
what's going on, right?
There are some violations that have existed prior to 2020 that I'm sure some in the audience know about that have been here for a long time
Mhm.
without ability to abate, and those are eventually gonna have to go to the prosecutor or are already at the prosecutor. But your question about do we give them time, we have one current one that's a floodplain violation and it's snowing out and it was snowing out and they're trying to work with their surveyor to finish up a permit and we've given them, I think, till April 1st and it's.
So it's
a
very
desire for-
discretionary, is what I mean.
And it's also a desire for compliance.
Right, right. So as long as they're showing an intent to try to comply, then we have the discretion to establish whatever timeline necessary.
Yes, and we'll work with the prosecutor, we'll let him or her know that we have this situation and here's where we think we can go with it.
Right. Does that help? Like, are you
Yeah, a
still,
little
still
bit.
issues
I'm
with the
still
rigidity of it?
Yeah, that's I have issues in my own.
Yeah, I think we're trying to get the, I refuse to respond, or I refuse to do something about it.
Yeah. Just add a
But
little.
if somebody
bit more.
does respond, you know, they're gonna have an avenue to work with somebody if there's extenuating circumstances, like weather, or can't get legal help to sort it out, or something like that. So I think we're really kind of targeting people that don't want to do something about it.
And deliberately are adversarial to the process that we put in front of them to try to rectify the situation, because there's not enough weight behind our position.
Correct, and that was the reason that this conversation started. It wasn't about all those who are already doing, or responding and taking care of it. It's the ones that step up that don't.
It's more of a bad faith situation than anything else.
What if you have a contractor that's saying, oh, I'm fine, and then the homeowner is still getting notes from the county saying, hey, you're in violation, but their contractor's saying you're fine, we're gonna keep building.
It's the landowner.
I've seen that.
I saw that with the Cabinets Northwest, and like,
Yeah,
Right.
whatever.
So Scott, are you airing concerns about the lack of discretionary power to
Sure.
enforce?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the right answer. Sorry.
No, that's okay, no, I appreciate you bringing these things up, because it has always been our intent from the outset to not come up with anything that is onerous.
Right.
Nothing that is not consistent with the culture of our county. We are very liberty-minded, and we are advocates for people's personal property rights. So I definitely appreciate your sharing and wanting to bring up things like that for
I'm
discussion.
not wording it very well, but I'll try to do better.
Any other
It seems like
questions?
there's some kind of caveats, like we kind of, I don't know. And then you get to like the crazy junkyard people that are just gonna do what they want anyway, and like. I mean,
So,
I mean, I think
just
it's-
a reminder, we're not really in deliberation.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. I just want to allow this stage to be directed to staff for questions. We can always open that up again. I just want to do that as a reminder, and then the next, we're going to engage with the public. We'll close public comment, and then we'll enter into deliberation and go from there. So, any questions for staff at this moment? I'm not trying to stifle that. If you do have questions, that's okay. Okay, all right, thank you, Claire. Now's the opportunity for anyone here that would like to speak concerning this particular application. So please state your name and please share with us your thoughts.
John Pullen from Naples. To clarify some of the concerns about the way the ordinance would be enforced, could possibly planning and zoning, maybe Claire could go over some examples of saying, hey, these are some of the ways that we are currently handling these violations, this is the process we follow, and that might show that this wouldn't be abused. And we'll say, hey, if we do have this particular kind of violation, this is what we're going to do. And if it runs into a particular concern like has been mentioned, this is how we would handle it. So it doesn't immediately jump to, the maximum possible penalty being imposed right off the bat, because that's not the way it would be enforced. And it's, from what I understand, that Claire's already sort of expressed that that's not the way it's done. It's done in a sequential process, and fines don't really get imposed until the judge looks at it, really. So if maybe perhaps you guys could go through that one more time and kind of summarize the way it's done and provide an example, maybe that might help alleviate that. And then another question I've got is, it says here in 4.6.3 that the Board of County Commissioners may commence a civil action. I'd like to know how much power the commissioners have to take action against a violation. And I ask that specifically because I know that from here on, our prosecutor is going to be very much overworked. And any violations that get written up are probably going to get stacked up in a very large pile, because there's criminal matters that are going to take precedence over civil matters. So if the commissioners have a way of seeking action on their own through the court system perhaps, that wouldn't take the prosecutor's time, it might be more effective that way. Anyway, so if you guys could address those two issues, I think it would help.
Thanks, John.
So,
Good question, John.
So just to clarify, John, the first one that you're asking for is more like a schedule or a procedure of escalation of how that process would play out depending on the violation. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
You mean listed in the ordinance?
Not necessarily in the ordinance, but in a practical sense, to say, and this is where, Claire could just say, hey, this is the way we do this. This part says this is what we do. and it looks like, letter, notice of violation, then action of the prosecutor then goes back, talks to people, that kind of thing.
So what the procedure would be?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, as applied in real life.
Okay.
Do you want me to do
Yeah, I
that
would
now?
like,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, yeah.
Mayor Barr, this is our list of violations. It's, I think it's smaller than a 6-point right now type, starting in 2020. The blues are ones that we were able to resolve. The green are, the blue are unfounded, meaning they wrote back to us and said, hey, I'm not really doing that, or whatever. They got their permit and we didn't find it. And then the green are resolved, that they had been abated because they came in and got their permit, for example. The orange are the actives, so on this page we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 major ones. In each of those, we've explained what we've done, what we've attempted, how many letters we sent, did they call or write to us, and eventually then it goes on to the prosecutor for what comes next. And sometimes when it gets to the prosecutor's asking us to do additional things, like to maybe schedule a visit with them. We've done that, to get additional photos if there's a lack of good evidence. So it's not all of a sudden you've got 8 or 14 plus 14 and now you're on to court. It's very rare. And also, the attorneys don't want to go to court. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. They'd rather we were able to solve it. So while it gives more tools, the goal is still going to be the processes of communications and working with the vendors. So I know you couldn't read this because I can, on the type size it is, but it's hopefully a graphic representation of what we're doing.
And then, Mr. Cullen, your second question?
Oh, the civil action.
The civil
question.
actions, yes.
So that comes straight out of Idaho code, and it's the authority of the commission to bring civil action, but it's actually court actions. They can't necessarily do anything outside of that court. And if that needs to be strengthened in that section to say it's court, it's meant to be court. But they do need an attorney to file that. But they, rather than the prosecutor, have the right to begin a civil action if something is not solved, and they would have to ask their attorneys to begin that action.
So could the commissioners then hire, like to supplement the help of the prosecutor, they could hire an attorney to say, hey, we want you to write this guy up for violation, start a court process? Could they do that?
I know in some counties they can. I don't know in this county if they would or would want to do that, or whether they would want that prosecutor to be the one to lead that.
Okay, but the ordinance does allow for that though.
Yeah.
So it
Although
could be
it
done if
doesn't
needed.
exclude that, it just says they have that right to bring the civil
Right.
action that comes straight out of Idaho code.
Yeah, it doesn't say, I guess it doesn't say how the county commissioners may commence it, just that they may.
Right. And that doesn't need to be clarified necessarily, it just needs to be
Right.
there as an option.
And if I'm understanding right, the how and all of that is defined by Idaho statute. So they would have to operate within state code
Correct.
parameters.
Right, and I did have that slide up as to where that came from, but I can't see it.
Right.
So, I guess I do have a question. So it looks like some of these, like the civil actions, so 4.6.3 and 4.6.6, did a lot of those come out of Idaho code?
Yes.
Because we don't word it quite like that usually, and I was like, that looks like it came from somewhere.
Oh, you mean the wording? Or just
Yeah.
the ability?
I think the wording made him think that what was coming from Idaho.
Oh, gotcha.
That's what triggered his thought process.
The authority comes from Idaho code, the wording comes from the work that I did with the prosecutor to write this.
Okay.
And
Alright.
number 4.6.6, prosecutor action, Travis had asked that it just be simply that the prosecutor has the authority. That's just simple, that it has authority through Idaho code to take action.
But that comes from Idaho code.
The authority
The
goes
authority
from Idaho
does.
code.
Okay.
It's just being explicitly codified here.
In other words, we recognize it, I see.
Mr. Cullen, did you have anything else that you would like to address?
No, that covers my concerns.
Well, thank you very much, and I do appreciate your participation over much time, and providing us your feedback has been very valuable, so thank you.
Yeah, your
for
letter
coming
was
and
great,
doing
thank you.
that. All right, anybody else would like to speak? Yes, please state your name for the record.
Ada Norris. Health, safety, and welfare, is that defined?
Idaho code doesn't specifically define it, and the jurisdictions are allowed to consider what that means. Typically, the ones that I've seen that used for, the most evident one is a floodplain situation where there's hazard that's been created by somebody's action. we have one we're working on right now where they actually altered a stream. So that's a potential where you could say it's obviously safety and likely could be health. They vary and.
So it's left to interpretation?
It is.
Okay. And so that was my next question is so if somebody is building and it's not necessarily an ordinance violation, but they are, their build is actually damaging their neighbor's property, would you be able to intervene on an immediate or would it have to go through due process?
I think that depends on what that damage is and whether or not it's truly a civil action between two parties versus the county. It really depends on what that situation is.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all, Adrian? Anybody else would like to speak with regard to this application?
Well, quick question on follow-up on her question. If there was an immediate issue, the county could issue a stop work notice or something along that line to halt to that as well then, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Could you do that now or not until this ordinance or?
I need to
Or
double
amendment.
check whether that was an option. I think
The
it
stop work
was. I
order.
think there was an injunction listed and could have been,
So,
but it says take legal action to restrain, enjoin, or stop.
Right.
where was health, safety, and where was that?
Well, she mentioned it in her comment.
Oh.
1.7.3.
Yes.
Yes.
It's the very last one.
Oh, I see, right, yeah. It's in the document.
I'm just thinking like, let's say they're cutting trees down to build a house or whatever and it's falling on, you know, their living area or whatever, and it's obviously gonna cause an issue. Is there gonna be an ability to immediately stop it?
We would have to make the connection that it's a land use violation, so if somebody's cutting timber and we don't necessarily see that tied to a house building, it might not invoke the land use laws. It might be the sheriff who needs to
Okay.
deal with that.
Right, okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else before I close public comment? Because once it's closed, it's closed. Okay, no one? All right, thank you very much. So let's go ahead and deliberate on this application and these changes proposed to our ordinance. Just at the outset, I would just like to make a few comments regarding this. This is, as I alluded to before, this has been a long process. We've gone over these things over and over again, and we're not changing the uses that people can have on their property. We're talking about being able to enforce the ordinance as it's already written. And historically, we've had problems and people come to us and have concerns over the lack of teeth to be able to actually enforce that which is already in our code. And it's been very frustrating. And it's certainly not my goal to come up with anything that is going to make government bigger, make government oppressive, and take away people's property rights. I believe I speak for everyone that the intent here is actually just to maintain that which is already codified in our ordinance and allow the county to also have its checks and balances, go through the appropriate streams, because the language as it's written right now is not appropriate for enforcement. Case in point is the sheriff's office. You know, the way the code is written right now, we don't have codified in our language the appropriate streams to go through and sequences. So those are just some of my comments, just on a more broad perspective that I'd like to open up with.
I agree.
Yeah, and it's, like you said, it's really nothing to do with changing anything in the ordinance. It's clarifying and giving us a little bit extra weight to enforce things that we've already agreed as a county on how we want things to be. So, I mean, I get the concerns that you're talking about, Scott, about being handed, for example.
Sure.
Or not exercising restraint and having additional, penalties and fines imposed and those kinds of things. But honestly, it's gonna kind of be up to the board itself to deliberate on a case-by-case basis anyway, how we want to proceed in the situation. And this gives us the options that we actually have more range, in my opinion, now than we've had before.
Is the fine per day?
It could be.
It doesn't have to be.
And then I have a question too, I guess on John's thing on the Board of Commissioners. How would they even be approached? I mean, how is it, would it would the complaint come to you, Claire, and then you put it to
I
the?
think that's appropriate.
Yes,
Yes, please.
So it goes through this entire process.
Right,
And then reaches generally the prosecutor, but the Board of Commissioners would have the ability to say, we would like to take this to a judge to file the civil action. At which time their attorney or a attorney that they are able to hire would be the one who has to bring it. And that usually, typically is gonna be when all other methods have failed.
interesting, alright.
So
Just kinda
if
curious.
there's a violation, you would be, say, someone comes to your office and says, hey, there's a violation or a property. As a board, we don't look at those case by case, you go to the prosecutor and say, hey, we have a violation, or you investigate it.
The prosecutors have always wanted the staff to investigate it, to
This
be
staff.
able to see whether there is a violation. Once we have enough evidence, we'll start that first letter.
Mhm.
So we have to work through our end of it before it can then go on to even the prosecutor. Unless, as we said earlier, unless there's some major
Okay.
threat.
Also, large portions of it are right out of state statute. We're not coming up with greater regulations and greater enforcement than that which is already consistent in state law. I think that there are a lot of avenues to be able to mitigate violations and find solutions. And as you guys, you've been on the board for a while now, you know that is always our goal, is to find solutions and to not ruin people's lives, but to try to help them with the best of our ability within the parameters of the law. And I think that the way that this is written, right now, it's just an application that will be submitted to the county commissioners. So we put in the countless hours of work, and then it will be ultimately up to the county commissioners to determine whether or not they agree with it, or if they even want to make any modifications to it. Even if we get through this stage, we have opportunity to speak with the commissioners and address areas of concern at that point as well. Same thing for the public. But I'm not saying that we can't make any changes at the moment either. If there's anything here that needs to be highlighted or tweaked, that's a substantive change. This is our opportunity before it does come before the commissioners.
Well, the clerical changes have been noted, right?
From today, yes.
That is.
Yes, thanks, I will.
All right.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think most of my questions got taken care of. I was a little uncertain because I was looking at Mr. Poland's letter. And I was like, okay, so the prosecutor action, but that's just for the prosecutor, and then there's a separate one up there for the county commissioners.
Correct.
So, and once I realized that, I was like, oh, okay. I guess I would put those together, but that's just, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I agree, and I think that we need to go ahead and do this or something very similar to it, because otherwise, we need to rip a whole bunch out of our ordinance. Or just dump the ordinance, because basically it's just a facade.
Suggestion.
It doesn't mean anything because we can't enforce it. And if the county as a whole wants to have an ordinance and enforce it, then we need to enforce it, otherwise we just need to get rid of the thing.
Well, we can't get rid of it, it's required by state law.
Actually, no.
And also, I think the approach that we have is a finesse approach. It's not heavy-handed.
Yeah.
And that's important to me, not to have that heavy hand of government hovering over the people of Boundary County. But at the same time, protecting people from egregious violations of our ordinance. So we gotta provide that mechanism for our prosecuting attorney and commissioners and everybody to be able to go through the appropriate channels.
Gives us the ability to bring some, equality to those that would follow the rules and do things the right way versus the ones that just don't care, take their little fine.
It's the ones that don't care, the problem.
The bad actors are the ones that
Most
ruin it for
people-
everybody else, right?
This isn't gonna be an issue with.
Right, so this gives us more meat to that side of things, but we still have all the discretion that we've had before. We just now have more that we can do.
So, one little thing I wanted to make sure I understood properly, 4.6.7, notice the title, that's not, we're not writing in permission for the county to do a civil asset forfeiture type thing. We're just putting a notice on the title that there is an infraction.
Right.
There's not even a lien,
No,
No,
it's
no,
just a notice.
it's just.
just so prospective buyers would see it, or maybe,
Right.
maybe a lender that's gonna loan on the property, they're gonna see that.
I think that's very important.
Right.
I understand buyer beware and all that, but, you know, you can spend your entire life and then you go to buy a property and invest all of your life savings and you realize, what in the world, this is going on in my
Yeah.
property and now
Yeah.
I inherited it.
And when you,
So-
in your real estate transaction, where you're gonna pull that title, they're gonna see that little asterisk, and they go, what's that? Why is that on here?
It's just a cloud, it's
Yeah.
not,
Well, that's what
Not
I thought,
lien.
but I wanted to go ahead and
Important clarification, Wade. I-
triple check it, but I can read, I thought that's what it meant.
So what I'm thinking is, like you said, Gil, we've been through this time and time again, this is a distillation of everything we've talked about, all these points, you know, one by one. We go ahead and let's say we recommend that the commissioners approve this, they're gonna take a look at it again.
Yep.
If it gets approved and we start using this code, if there are changes that need to be, if there's something that's not working out right, we can always come back at a later time
Sure.
and amend and then make revisions. So I think this is a really good, after all the, you know, the year that we put in on this, or maybe more than a year actually, I think this is a good place to start, implement it and see how it works.
Yeah, it's certainly an improvement.
It's a 1,000% improvement.
Yeah.
And you remember the old one, it said something like, you'd pay $100 and you'd pay another $100 and then 500 and that was it. And then there's nothing else we could do. So we would address all those glitches and everything. I think this is a great place to at least start.
Am I hearing a
Let's
motion?
set it up and see
Is that a
if it
motion,
flies.
Rob?
Is that a motion there?
That's a motion. It's a roundabout kind of.
You wanna read it? The official
I didn't
language.
see it.
It's on the last page.
There's a staff report thingy, Rob, a
Yeah.
separate one,
Oh,
and it's
separate
on the
one.
back page of it. Thingy is a very.
You know, would you mind doing it? Wait, I can't.
I'll do it, Wade, I'll do it. I move to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners approval as a request to repeal the current section 4 enforcement of the Boundary County zoning and subdivision ordinance and adopt a new section 4 enforcement as proposed in file number 23-0180, finding that the proposal is in accord with the comprehensive plan and the criteria of section 18 of the Boundary County land use ordinance based upon the findings and conclusions as written in the staff report.
Okay, that has been moved. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Rob seconds it. Any discussion on this?
I think we've done most of our stuff.
This is the last opportunity. All right. There being no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'm gonna abstain. Sorry,
You're gonna abstain or just be a no?
I guess, can I abstain? Is that legal?
I'll yes, it's legal.
I still don't like,
Here, hold on.
okay,
Any nays? Okay, no nays with one abstention.
Sorry.
That's Scott.
No, sorry,
that's Krabby Patty over here.
That's all right.
I don't like some of the wording and
Yeah,
I'm not a
mine's-
lawyer, so I can't vocalize it properly, so.
Okay,
I don't know if that'll make you able to vocalize it properly either.
thank you, everyone. That's the end of that section of our agenda. And now on to new business.
Oh, she's not done.
No, we just got a couple,
Got a couple little agenda items, don't we?
Because I don't have a slide, I'm gonna skip over some information we prepared for you on our activity of 2023, so I'll just leave that for our next meeting. And then, so our last items are, we don't have a schedule yet for this particular code section to go on to the Board of Commissioners because we had to wait for your recommendation. So that'll be scheduled to the next available County Commissioners meeting, allowing time for noticing to the newspaper. Sorry?
So it's like 5-6 weeks out.
It's always, you have to come at least a month ahead of time, so if we were to hear it a month from today, we have to get it in the newspaper by next week. And then the next items that would be up for your consideration, we have no files that are going to hearing next month. So that gives us an opportunity to talk about the subdivision code, land division code, as well as the expiration dates for placement permits. So we would intend to bring that back. At this time, one of our surveyors was here tonight, and I asked him if he might have time to come that night to talk about some of the specifics of the two codes we work with now, chapter 11 and chapter 20, and talk about some improvements. And you can recall, I think, that we talked about that pretty extensively in 23. It included some talk about road standards, but also about making the process a little bit easier, not taking all those items like lot line adjustments to hearing, and looking at some design issues that might address some of our quilted designs that we've seen over time.
We had another, surveyor too, that,
Steve
Steve,
Moyer,
Moyer, yeah.
let's see if he can make it.
I would like him to do this because, he had a lot of comments in the past, I remember
Yes.
in meetings past, he had a lot of
Yes,
good
and
information.
he's been writing to me, I'll see if
Okay.
he's able.
So I had one more thing the question that I had as I was listening to our first item this evening, and that was, because every time we do a zone change, we have to do a comp plan change. Is there a way to unsync those? How do we fix that? And if now is not the time to answer that, we can talk about that next time. But
Usually,
I'd be interested in fixing that so that we could
Streamline all of that.
do something.
you try to avoid calling them the same thing, and you usually give your comp plan some broader, like, or a range of 2 to 5 acres, or uses are commercial light to industrial. So you're not so firm with it has to be this size and it has to be this use.
So our comp plan is just as specific as our ordinance?
Yes,
is the
it
problem?
is,
I
yeah.
see, okay. All right. Well, that was an easy answer. It's not an easy solution, but it's an easy
No,
answer.
it's a can of worms you're not ready.
That's all I have.
That's all you had? All right, I'm gonna declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
I have 6:40.
1840.
All right.
Hey, thanks, Ron.